And I always say there's no true lockdown corners, but the reason there's no true lockdown corners is because of the rules. I mean, those guys are they're the most athletic people on the field, outside corners in the NFL. Now, maybe people in Philadelphia have a hard time believing that because they haven't had good outside corners. But if you see the guys who are, the Whites, Tre'Davious Whites of the world, and corners like that, Patrick Peterson when he was at the apex of his game, those types of corners, I mean, Kyle Pitts ain't getting open against those guys. Receivers in this division, and the fact that Washington had already brought in Curtis Samuel to team with Terry McLaurin. You talk about Dallas and those three receivers, and all of a sudden Kenny Galladay's with the Giants, the team with Shepard, and you start to say, well, who the heck's going to cover these guys outside of Darius Slay? And the answer to that is, well, the good news is nobody has to today, but if you get to September, it's not good news. So I'm starting to look at those corners at the top of this draft. Patrick Surtain, most notably, and then J.C. Horner's kind of replaced Caleb Farley as the second one, or potentially the first, depending on what flavor you like. Because Farley had back surgery, so I think he's going to take a little bit of a tumble. Not out of the first round or anything of that nature, but nonetheless, they got to find corners. And, we mentioned Dory Jackson, the Giants got him. So it's going to be difficult to find him if they don't find him in the draft.
Something that you and I have talked a lot about over the past, maybe 2 years, John, is just the evolution of the NFL and how, the corner/secondary group has really evolved and maybe for the worse, just given how the NFL is played and the rules and pass interference, et cetera, and the importance of having a strong defensive line, front seven, guys that can get pressure on the opposing quarterback, get into the opponent's backfield. And that really is the new age secondary. So I bring this up because, all right, if you don't want to use the 6th overall pick for a corner, if you don't see a guy you really like at the 37th overall pick, well, how about we start thinking about really beefing up the defensive line? And we just saw Vinny Curry, who was a role player on that unit, go off to the Meadowlands for the Jets. So what do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, that's another way to go at it, and that's always been the Eagles' philosophy, is to build up on both lines of scrimmage, both sides, the offensive and defensive line. The theory is, obviously, even though they did lose Vinny Curry, and Vinny's 33, so it's probably time to turn that page anyway, but they're still pretty good on the defensive line. So I think everybody looks at that and says, yeah, you do have to start turning it over because Brandon Graham is obviously aging as well. But Brandon is still playing at a high level. Derek Barnett's back. And, he might be described by some as a disappointment, but I think he's been a really good player. I think the problem with him is too many injuries, too many problems trying to stay on the field, so you hope he can solve that. And then Josh Sweat really kind of turned a corner, at least as a rotational end last season. So you probably do need a fourth. Defensive tackles remain solid with Cox and Javon Hargrave, who got better and better as he got more used to the 4-3 coming from the 3-4 two-gap scheme in Pittsburgh. And then Hassan Ridgeway's back. Similar story to Derek Barnett. Has been a good player with the Eagles, just injured a little bit too much. So I do think they have a lot more talent on the defensive line than in the secondary. So that's why I think you're focused on the secondary first. But, I mean, Anthony Harris probably describes what you just said better than anybody else. When he had Daniil Hunter in front of him and Everson Griffin and Linval Joseph, he was a star. And when those guys were gone, wasn't a star. So, yeah, I mean, the pass rush can help defensive backs, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Like the defensive line isn't a weakness by any stretch here for the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a strength. It's probably their best unit. Maybe the offensive line when it's healthy. We don't know how it's going to look now heading into this season just yet. But another thing that we've talked a lot about, John, is the finances, the books for the Philadelphia Eagles. And I know I've asked you this plenty, but we're not really going to see them spend any type of money, are we? And we've talked a lot about the Anthony Harris deal and the value there that you're getting for what you paid for him. Those are really the only types of deals that we'll probably see the Eagles pull off, or is that false? Maybe they will spend a little bit more if the right player comes to their table.
I think they could spend a little bit more. I talked about corner, and if Jackson didn't get the big deal, I think they could have went as high as 6 or 7, maybe even $8 million for a player like that. But I don't know how many players like that are left out there. At positions of need for the Eagles, we're in phase 2. And if you look at everybody who was, hand-wringing, I always say wait until the details come out. So they were hand-wringing over Joe Flacco's deal, and, there's 4 voidable years on the back end. There's 4 voidable years on Anthony Harris's contract. So essentially, they both count for less than $1.5 million on the salary cap. So, that's how the Eagles are doing business. And they're not the only ones, by the way. The entire league is doing that because of the pandemic shortfall. So everybody's just, waiting for the new TV deals to kick in and saying, who cares about a couple $1 million down the road because this thing's going to explode. And that's how the Eagles are doing it, and they'll continue to do it that way. 4 voidable years. It's the year of voidable years in the NFL.
What's the likelihood at this point, if you have to give percentages, of the Eagles picking at number 6 versus trading in any fashion? Like 80% chance that they're going to actually have the number 6 pick when it's all said and done. What do you think?
I would have said that as we get closer, I'm starting to waver a little bit. I would have, if you would have asked me that 10 days ago or so, I would have said probably about 85%. They need a difference maker. And now just by seeing some of the things, and Joe Flacco specifically, and as I mentioned, we talked about Jeffrey Lurie's, sort of decree that Chris Mortensen reported about building around Jalen Hurts. I didn't think that was very smart from a strategy standpoint. And ever since then, Howie's been trying to repair that. And I think he's done a good job. And I think getting Joe Flacco is another indication of that good job, and the fact that now teams are looking at him and saying, okay, the Eagles are set at quarterback. So, maybe we can trade with them. As I said, if you're Carolina or Denver and you're looking for a quarterback, and say the Eagles like J.C. Horn or they like Patrick Surtain, but I don't want to take those players at 6. Maybe I can go back to 9 or 8 even. Just a couple spots, and it looks a lot better. So now I'm more 60-40 they'll keep the pick, but there is a chance they'll move back. Not back a long ways, but a little bit.
We talk about, the finances and trying to be cost effective. How about Singleton? And I know you wrote about this as well, but you look at Singleton's year, and what do you have? 120 tackles. He wasn't a starter until week 6, and he's going to cost less than $1 million for this upcoming year. Is that correct?
Yeah, $850,000, and that's sort of that's kind of the way the NFL, everybody sets up in professional sports. That's your system, and he's an exclusive rights free agent, so he hasn't gotten to that point where you're unrestricted and you have a chance to go on the open market. So Yeah, I mean that's especially when you're transitioning. We're not allowed to use rebuild. When you're transitioning, you want to have good young players who are early in their careers because they're not getting paid a lot. And especially a guy like Alex, he's not even a draft pick. I mean, he was undrafted, went to Canada, came back, so he's really cheap. And he played really well last season. He really did. So it wasn't like it was. I mean, there's two things to that. The Eagles didn't want to play him. They were forced to play him. And they got lucky because he can play. And for whatever reason, pedigree, I often talk about. People put too much emphasis on that. And you'll see a first-round pick get opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. And you'll see an undrafted guy. He'll get one shot. And if he doesn't take advantage of it, that's it for him. And there's some guys who can play. And Alex, as I said, went to Canada, was the Defensive Player of the Year in Calgary, won a Grey Cup, which is, their championship game. I mean, he was just really good, a really dominant player. And I remember Ken Flajole talking to me about him when he first signed here. And obviously it was the off season. That was pre-pandemic. So we were having rookie camps and mini camps and all that kind of stuff. And he said right away, he said, Alex isn't going to show up until the pads come on. And he was 100% right because he's physical and he's really smart and he's always in the right position. And as I said, the Eagles got lucky with him.
Talking with John McMullen, our NFL Eagles insider. We do this every night right here on The Fix at 7:30. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Go check out some of his new articles on PhillyVoice.com as well as SI.com and listen to him every Saturday morning. Host Extending the Play, 10 a.m. to 11. Birds 365, 8 a.m. to 10 with Jody Mack. John, pro days, this is, that time. 'Tis the season for the pro days. I know Penn State had their pro day today, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know what other significant schools, had a pro day today, if any others. But I know Micah Parsons, while we're on the subject of linebacker, he's potentially a top 5 to 10, not top 5 probably, but top 10, 15 range draft pick at linebacker. So just wanted your thoughts there and maybe the pro days all around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's an option for the Eagles simply because I do think the new coaching staff will put more emphasis on the position than the previous coaching staff, pretty much because they have to. and just knowing, where Jonathan Gannon comes from, he was in Minnesota, where they have guys like Kendricks and Barr, and he was in Indianapolis where they have Leonard. So he knows the value of a good linebacker. But you see the difference. He's, Parsons to me is a 3-4 linebacker. He's an edge rusher. He's not. And the Eagles and what Gannon will be looking for is the Kendricks, the Barrs, the Leonards, 3-down linebackers who can do everything. So I just don't think he's a fit for Philadelphia. And there is no Devin White, who's going to be a top 10 pick as a 3-down linebacker. That guy doesn't exist in this draft. So I don't think it's going to be in the equation at number 6. But certainly later in the draft, I mean, they have to improve that position. And who knows? I've talked about Davion Taylor a lot. He's got all the physical skills to be able to do what the Eagles want, but he's so raw. And I've argued just throw him into the deep end of the pool, see if he can play. If he can't, then you got to go in a different direction. But they're looking for more of a well-rounded Eric Kendricks type than a Micah Parsons type.
Who's a player that the Eagles could, have their eye on that can maybe play like multiple positions, or maybe not play multiple positions, but can do a lot on the defensive side of the ball? Like we talk about the Swiss Army knife on offense, someone that can line up in the backfield. You can hand it off to them. They can block on third down. You can line them up in the slot. Like on defense, like Willie Parks was maybe a poor man's version of that on defense. Didn't pan out, but
very poor,
very
a broke
poor.
man.
Yes, very homeless man. Homeless.
Although Will thought he could play everywhere.
Sure.
In Will's defense, he probably could, just not that well.
Right.
No, but I like Will personally.
Yeah, I spoke with him. I interviewed him, when he first signed. But you get my point. Like, is there anyone like that either on the market or in the draft in the later rounds that could really help the Eagles on the defensive side of the ball?
I mean, they had, and I thought that was one of the. I thought they'd make a bigger push to bring back Jalen Mills. I really did. And he had proven himself as kind of that versatile guy who could play all over. And more so than obviously Malcolm Jenkins, far more so than Jalen. But those players aren't hard to find, and aren't easy to find. And I always use Minka Fitzpatrick as an example because he's such a great player. And the Miami Dolphins wanted to turn him into sort of a Malcolm Jenkins type. Somebody, Jim Schwartz would tell you, he played 7 different positions. He played every single position on the back 7 at times for the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I don't know if any other player in the NFL has done that. The Miami Dolphins wanted to turn Minka into that. I'm not sure if they want him to play all 7, but it was so overwhelming to him. He didn't want to do it. He just wanted to play safety. He wanted to settle back in one position, and he is a star in Pittsburgh. He's a legitimate star. So it's almost impossible to find those types of players. The best you can hope for is sort of that hybrid linebacker safety who can play both. And the kid from Notre Dame, I always butcher his name. I don't want to do it. He's the one guy. He's probably going to be drafted 15 to 20, I would think. Maybe fall a little bit farther because he is a tweener, and some teams get nervous by that. But he's so athletic. He played linebacker. A lot of people think he could play safety. That's the one guy I could see who could turn into that type of player. But I think the Eagles are not in a position to get him. He's not in the mix at number 6, and he's not going to last to number 37. So I don't know how you get him.
You look at, J.C. Horn is someone we talked about a lot already. And I brought this up in that conversation last night, and I want to bring it back up. I just don't feel like the Eagles going any direction outside of a weapon on offense with that 6th overall pick is the right move. And, J.C. Horn, he could be a stud in the NFL. And you could make a lot of good points to justify picking him as high as number 6 overall. Fine. But just with the Eagles situation right now, John, I just don't know how it's not as simple as Kyle Pitts or one of those big name receivers that are up at the top of the mock draft boards.
Well, it might be as simple as that, but I think as we get closer and things get clearer and clearer, for instance, I don't think Devontae Smith, for instance, is not in the conversation anymore. I don't think he's in the conversation at number 6. So now all of a sudden you're down to 2 players, and that's Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts, who certainly will be in the conversation. Ultimately, I don't think Chase, I've been pretty consistently, I don't think he's getting 6. I think Pitts might. So now you're down to 1 player. So who knows if either of these guys are even there, number 1. And I kind of said yesterday on the show, and I mentioned it on the middle today as well with those guys, scares me a little bit, not the player. Scares me a little bit because he's such a unique player. He's not a tight end. He's not a wide receiver. And that, to me, means you have to be inventive in ways to use him. And other than Andy Reid and there's a couple others, I'm not really comfortable with unique players because I've seen coaching staffs falter and constantly, and they just get away from it because you got to make notes in your game plan. I say it all the time. It's easy to script when you're in those first 15, 20 plays, which we'll get into that another time, but scripts are overrated too. But my point is when you get into the guts of the game, you got to remind yourself, okay, we got to get Pitts in this position. We got to get even Tyreek Hill, somebody as dynamic as that. You got to get him in this position. You got to keep kicking yourself in the butt. I don't know if Nick Sirianni can do that. I don't know if Shane Steichen can do that. No idea. I do know they're a young coaching staff. I know it's a first-time head coach. I know it's an offensive coordinator with very little experience who certainly has never done it in the past. So I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I do know if you have a good corner, you just tell them to go outside the numbers and say, cover that guy. That's a lot easier, is my point.
Yeah, and that's interesting, and we can probably get more into that tomorrow night on a Friday, but I do want to continue this here while we still have some time. I mean, when you say he's unique and you have to, game plan and scheme up the right play calls to really put him in a position to be successful, I think that's interesting because everything that I have read and heard about him on the surface, I'm not going to sit here and say I've been diving deep into him, scouting report, and game film, but he's extremely athletic. He has ball skills. He's an explosive playmaker. I see that a lot. He separates himself from defenders, size, strength, all of those cliche and standard words to describe elite prospects. But you're saying you can't really just line him up in the slot or line him up how you lined up Zach Ertz. It's not going to be that simple with him?
Well, no, I think you can line him up like you lined up Zach Ertz. I mean, Zach is more of a flex tight end. Zach is more of a normal sort of guy you can put in line, even though he's not a great blocker. He's more of a tight end, and you can do that, but I think you're going to lose out on a lot of what Kyle Pitts can do, especially if you're putting him on the line of scrimmage. I mean, it's not going to look good at times, and it's not going to take advantage of what he does well. And that's what I'm talking about. And then you have these other, yes, can he move outside the numbers at times? Of course, he's tremendously athletic. But that's what you know what? If you line up the best corners in this game and play Pitts outside the numbers at Z or X, he's not going to get open consistently against great corners in this league. He's athletic for his size. He's athletic for an average tight end. He's tremendously athletic. Guess what? He's not athletic when matched up against NFL cornerbacks, top-tier NFL cornerbacks, outside cornerbacks. And that's what I mean. You can't just say, oh, he could be a receiver. Yeah, he could be a receiver compared to your average tight end, but he can't be a receiver compared to Julio Jones and be out there all the time and dominates. So that's what I'm saying. He's very unique. You have to understand he's going to be a flex receiver essentially, which is basically a slot receiver. And then you also get into the conversations that are slot receivers really valuable enough to take the 6th overall pick? You have to get through that argument. I would look at how Kansas City uses Kelsey as the perfect way. But again, that's Andy Reid. Do you have confidence in Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen to put together game plans like Andy Reid? And by the way, because Pitts is more athletic than even Kelsey, but also remember what else Kansas City has.
Tyreek Hill.
That's Tyreek Hill.
Yep. That's
who's another unique player who helps open things up for Travis. So you have all these moving parts. I think the kid's a great player. But I would just be concerned because he is unique, and you do have to game plan the proper way, and it's not as easy as people think it is.
No, I literally looked up Travis Kelce numbers without Tyreek Hill, and I can't find it this quickly. But as before you even brought that up, so that's perfect. Like, I'm not saying Travis Kelce would stink without Tyreek Hill, but I think that's a valid point, because if you're the Eagles and you just throw Kyle Pitts out there with Dallas Goedert or even without Dallas Goedert, well, who the heck else do you have on offense? It's going to be pretty easy for opponents to say, all right, well, they have Pitts. They don't have any receivers we need to worry about.
Yeah, and, you start talking, as I said, about corners. And I had this conversation with Zach Ertz with fans at times, and they're saying, well, just put Zach Ertz outside. I'm like, Zach Ertz can't get open against NFL corners on the outside. He can get open against linebackers and safeties. But, I mean, those guys are, even though their jobs are difficult, and I always say there's no true lockdown corners, but the reason there's no true lockdown corners is because of the rules. I mean, those guys are they're the most athletic people on the field. Outside corners in the NFL. Now, maybe people in Philadelphia have a hard time believing that because they haven't had good outside corners. But if you see the guys who are, the Whites, Tre'Davious Whites of the world, and corners like that, Patrick Peterson when he was at the apex of his game, those types of corners, I mean, Kyle Pitts ain't getting open against those guys.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And tomorrow night, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the Eagles and what they need on offense potentially for a weapon. Is it Kyle Pitts? Do they need to go wide receiver? And I want to incorporate the backfield just a little bit, not saying, tied to the 6th overall pick, but just look at the Eagles offense overall, the weapons, and how they can maybe piece this puzzle together. So make sure you tune in tomorrow night on The Fix to hear Johnny Mack and myself get more into the Philadelphia Eagles. Follow them, like I always say, on Twitter at JF McMullen, a great follow, phillyvoice.com, si.com, and make sure you're tuned in every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. on Extending the Play. All right, John, I'll let you go. I know you're tracking the NBA trade deadline, latest news and notes there, so go ahead.
You give up role players, Ryan. Can't give them up.
Can't do it, man. Matisse Thybulle, he's gold.
Well, real quick, they did ask for too much. If what I hear, they wanted
2 first-rounders.
2 first-round picks, Danny Green, Thybulle, Maxey, and I think Scott as well. I think that's what Tom Moore put out there. So that's too much. But, yeah, the love of Thybulle and Maxey, we've talked about that before. I'll never understand it.
Neither will I, my friend.
I don't think Daryl Morey's that dumb. He would have done it, but they asked for too much.
Yeah, that's something you give up for Harden, not like Kyle Lowry. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, man. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yep, there he is, Johnny Mack. Good stuff, man, as always. All right, let's get into a break. We're 1 hour down. When we come back, Ben Fawkes from Veasan, Vice President in Digital Content, joins me next. We're going to talk some college hoops, baby. March Madness. Keep it locked in.
Football in Philadelphia is a lifestyle, a passion from birth, and a personal responsibility to know the game. Boo when necessary. And think about EATLES, Eagles! Every second of every minute of every hour of every day. Birds 365 was created for you. Jody Mack, the legendary sports talker, joins forces with NFL insider John McMullen. Birds 365. Start your morning with Johnny Mack and Jody Mack across the JAKIB Media Network. Watch it live on YouTube.